everyone. Welcome to today's episode on how to real estate. And today we are going to talk about real estate red flags, what buyers often miss during a walkthrough. So here's the thing, the average buyer spends only about 15 to 25 minutes in a home before they make an offer on the home. That is correct. 15 to 25 minutes in the home. And so lots of things sometimes are overlooked, and these things will then show up during the home inspection, and they can sometimes be avoided if you actually realize it during the initial walkthrough if these are deal breakers. Now, I personally don't think that necessarily any of these one thing should be a deal breaker. I mean, maybe some of them, but it seems silly to pay a home inspector to, go in and find these things that you could probably see as you walk through. So let's jump into them. The first one is if the home was a flip and if it was done quality or quick. And yes, sometimes you can have both, absolutely. But unfortunately, sometimes it's not. So what you want to look at when you go into a home and it's an older year built, but everything is new and shiny, you want to make sure that you're actually looking at the detail of the quality of the workmanship and not just seeing granite countertops and new appliances. So some of those quality details, and again, these are not reasons to walk away from the home, but these are things that could come up later and you just need to kind of budget for them. But some of the things you need to look at is just the installation of the trim, of the windows, of the light, of the outlets and the light switch plates. Again, very easy things to correct, but it is an indication that maybe the job was done very cheaply or maybe lower quality craftsmanship, workmanship, or even lower quality materials. And that will then eventually come back and bite you, the buyer, and you will have to address those things. So just kind of taking a look at the details rather than seeing it as an overall new kitchen. Opening and closing cabinet doors and drawers, just the quality of the material of the cabinet doors and drawers. Again, keeping in mind that if you're buying a home under $250,000, some of these things you're not going to get solid wood, you're not going to get even real wood trim, it's going to be a composite trim. But are the corners mitered? Do the corners come together? Have the nail hose been filled in? Just a lot of little detailed things that'll give you an indication of what kind of workmanship went into the home. Again, if you're getting it at a good price, none of these should be a deal breaker. The next one is foundation and floor concerns. Now, this could be a deal breaker for you, but you've got to kind of figure out what the issue is. Foundation and floor repairs. If you're talking about a slab and there's unevenness in the floor and there's cracks in the floor, then you want to be mindful that when it comes to cracks in the floor, concrete does two things. It gets hard and it cracks. However, if the cracks are uneven, one side is higher than the other, or it's got a significant gap in the crack, those are definitely red flags and things that you may want to think about prior to actually paying for a home inspection. Have a conversation with the listing agent and get as much information as you can. And then also check doors and windows and make sure that they open and close correctly, because this could be an indication of settling or foundation issues, and typically that's where you're going to see an issue. Also, looking at the doors and windows on the corners of those to see if there's patched cracks or patched areas where the seller has corrected it aesthetically, but maybe not done what needs to happen with the foundation. Now, if it's a crawl space and you see some of this unevenness or even some of the cracks, those are not as scary because it's very easily accessible from underneath. And if you have someone knowledgeable, they can typically go under the house and take a look and see if it's just one little area that has dropped and just needs to be jacked up, or if the floor joists are completely rotted out and you need to run the other direction. So again, don't assume because a door is sticky and there's one crack that you shouldn't buy the home, but make sure that you really kind of dig into it and lean into it and figure out what the actual problem is, okay? Sometimes sticky doors can literally just be that they either need to loosen the hinges or tighten the hinges, and or they have thicker carpet or thicker flooring than, and the door just needs to be shaved off. So not necessarily a reason to run. Okay, the next is the heat and air conditioning system. That would include the ductwork and then also poor ventilation. And it seems like we're running into this more and more often. Foam or spray foamed insulation is becoming very, very popular in our market. However, believe it or not, you can over insulate your home to the point that your ceiling sweats. And yes, I said ceiling. Jill was like, if your ceiling is sweating, then you have a ventilation problem. And this can be very, very serious, because if the home is not breathing, then unfortunately it can grow mildew, and then that can go on to an uglier four-letter word that I don't like to say, but I'm going to say it: mold. Yeah, Jill was like, what is she about to say? So the home has to be able to breathe. So if you are seeing your walls or your ceiling sweat, this is something that you want to check out. But when it comes to your HVAC system, a lot of times with an older home, the HVAC system will be under the house in a crawl space, and all of the insulation on the ductwork will have come off or be laying on the ground. And that is definitely something that you're going to want to fix. It's not a massive, huge expense, but it's a pain in the butt, because you've got to find someone who's willing to crawl under the home, reattach it, and wrap it. But it will affect the actual overall performance of your systems, and it can wear the system out, because if the air is escaping into the crawl space, then you're never going to get the temperature in the house that you want. We recently had a situation where one of the ducts had actually come loose from a back bedroom and was laying on the ground underneath the house. So it was just blowing. If the AC was on, it was blowing AC in the crawl space. If the heater was on, it was blowing hot air in the crawl space. And so the units constantly ran trying to keep that up. So checking out the ductwork is as important as checking out the actual systems to see if they work. The next is the age of the roof and then the condition of the roof. So especially if you have trees right around the home, it can actually, even though a lot of people say, oh, that'll protect the roof, yes and no. It depends on where those trees are, and if they're overhanging the roof or they're touching the roof, it can actually cause wear and tear and damage and make the age of the roof go down much, much quicker. The other thing that people miss with their roofs is you've got to have good ventilation. I'm going to talk a lot about ventilation today. It's really, really important. Whether it's in the attic access or in the crawl space, you've got to ventilate the home. But for a roof to last the 20 years that it's supposed to, and I know you're saying, well, but I have a 30-year shingle. Yes, I understand you have a 30-year shingle, but most insurance companies only will give that about 20 years. So, but making sure that you have good ventilation, you can add vents. Okay, you can't add vents. A licensed professional, I mean, obviously you could, but I would not recommend cutting a hole in your roof. Let the professionals do this, because it can be done pretty easily for under $800 to $1,000, and it can extend the life of your roof by adding additional ventilation and keeping the attic from getting so hot that you basically have heat coming from inside and heat coming from outside. So checking the age of the roof, if there's any patches or repairs, and then also just being aware of what a full replacement cost may be, and is that a 3-year situation, a 5-year situation, or will you have 10 or more? Okay, next, plumbing clues. Okay, so what I've done in the past is I've had buyers who legitimately, with their closing cost and with their down payment, could not afford to pay for a home inspector. So we did what we called a common sense inspection, and plumbing was one of those. We would go into the home, schedule an appointment, go into the home, and turn on all of the sinks at the same time to see how the drainage was. Was it slow to drain? Did it back up? We would then turn on, if we were in the bathroom, we would turn on the sink and the shower and then flush a toilet. What did that do to the water pressure of the home? These things are important because sometimes it's just simply a calcium buildup, and that can easily be replaced. The screen can be cleaned or replaced. But if you get just a tiny little trickle, then there could be a problem. Especially if all you're doing is running the sink and the shower and you've got really, really low pressure. It's better to know that prior to closing than after you've moved in and find out that the water pressure is really, really bad. Also, what you want to check for are water stains, and that is not only on the ceiling, because I know that's what you were thinking. Water stains can also show up on your baseboards in your bathroom areas. Has there been, has the toilet overflowed and maybe there was some damage and the seller forgot to mention it to you? So checking the baseboard, the trim, and seeing if there's any water stains there. Obviously checking your ceilings, checking around the ducts, because the ducts will also sweat, and the ducts will sweat, and then the vents will show where that is by staining or by rusting. So being aware of that. And then also with the plumbing, odd odors. We had a situation where one of the bathrooms just had a really bizarre smell, and it wasn't like a stinky bathroom smell. It was like some kind of toxic gas smell, and it turned out that a bird had built a bird's nest inside the vent on the ceiling, and so the gas was not going out, it was coming back into the bathroom. So, and it was not a pleasant smell. So these are things that you want to check out and make sure that they're taken care of. I personally think that a seller should go through and do these common sense inspections on their own home so that they can avoid any surprises. Now, I know what you're thinking, but they live there, they should know this stuff. Believe it or not, most sellers have never been under their own home or in their attic. And if it's just a husband and a wife living there, very rarely are they turning on 2 sinks and a shower and flushing a toilet at the same time. So these are things that could show up in an inspection and be a complete surprise to a seller. The electrical panel. Now, realistically, for a buyer, I don't want the buyer trying to do their own electrical inspection. I would say, though, that if you're in the home and the electrical panel is accessible, I would just open the panel door and see if there's any openings in it, like are there holes in the panels? That'll be something that eventually the appraiser would call out, and someone's going to need to pay for that and cover it. So as a seller, just run down to your local electrical store and get those blanks and pop them in. As a buyer, be mindful that might be something that you want to ask the seller to take care of prior to the appraiser coming, because the appraiser will call it out. Also being mindful of the outlets. This is something that I kind of want to fight people on. Anytime a home was built before 1978 and I go in and all of the outlets are 3-prong, I want you to be mindful that does not mean that the outlets have been grounded. You can remove the 2-prong outlets and put in 3-prong, and you still haven't grounded. But in most people's mind, they think, oh, this is up-to-date electrical. It probably is not. And if you are only willing to buy the home if it's up-to-date electrical, then go ahead and try to find that out prior to hiring the home inspector and paying them $350. It's a very easy test, and most times sellers are aware if they also had the wires grounded when they updated those outlets. Next is the smell test. I know that most people approach it as what is the seller trying to hide. I don't think that most sellers go at this as trying to hide something in the sense that it's something bad. I think sometimes sellers just have no clue that they do have a smell. Someone mentions it to them and they think that putting in a potpourri or a room Scentsy is the way to go. And that is absolutely not the way to go. If you've got, as a seller, if you've got a smell in your home, you need to try to figure out what that smell is, especially if it's like a dampness. It's going to show up in an inspection and it's going to be there, so you might as well try to find it before the home inspector does. And as a buyer, I think this one's a little bit harder because it would be really hard for a buyer walking through a home to be able to figure out exactly where that smell is coming from. So be mindful of that. And of course, we've already touched a little bit on why buyers should hire a home inspector to check the attic and the crawl space and the roof. These are areas that buyers are not typically allowed to go into fully because you're not licensed, you're not insured, and if something went wrong, who's responsible? So if I'm with a buyer and they want to go into the crawl space, it's head and shoulders only. So hiring a licensed home inspector to actually go all the way through, definitely hiring a pest inspector who will go all the way through. And the same thing with the going into the attic. I don't let my buyers leave the steps to the attic, again, head and shoulders into the attic space only, unless the person is insured. We've had many a licensed inspector step through the sheetrock, and we've had a few fall all the way through. And they are insured, and that is on them, not the homeowner. Whereas a buyer, that would be no bueno. So be mindful of that. And then I think the last thing to be aware of as a buyer is the emotional trap. And this happens quite often. And this is where you have always dreamed about this particular street and that red door. And you are emotionally sold on the home, and you have rose-colored glasses and look beyond all of these issues that I've just mentioned. That can actually cost you a ton of money in the long run. So try to avoid the emotional aspect of it and realize that even though it's going to be your home, it does have to be a smart financial decision. And just have your checklist. Make sure you're working with a buyer's agent that is savvy and has, even if they haven't been in the business for very long, that they've done enough transactions that they're aware of things to help you with. Because at the end of the day, sometimes that level of knowledge and skill set that the person you're working with will save you tons of money. So those are red flags that buyers should be aware of, and sellers, since we're telling buyers to be aware of this, you should go check it out in your own home also. As always, thank you so much for the questions. Please like, follow, and share, and can't wait to see you till the next episode. Thanks, guys.